Hey, it's Marty Boardman here with Fix and Flip Hub, and I've been fixing and flipping houses since 2003 in Wisconsin and in Arizona, here where I live. And in this video today, I'm going to explain to you how to buy a house at a foreclosure auction. Now that's kind of a generic term because depending upon where you live, they may be called sheriff sales or trustees sales. And the process can take place two ways. Again, depending upon what state you live in. There are what are called non-judicial states and judicial states. If you live in a non-judicial state, like I do here in Arizona, the process is governed by state statute. So the lender will file what's called a notice of default or notice of trustee sale with the county, and this puts the homeowner and everybody else on notice that they're in foreclosure. And they actually, a lot of times, will set a date right there in that notice. And that date is usually 90 to 120 days later, and the homeowner has that window of time to bring their loan current or pay their loan off, and if they don't, it sells at the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. Now, in a judicial state, it works a little differently. The lender actually has to take the homeowner to court and sue them for the right to get the house back and foreclose on the property. And this process can take much longer. It could take a year, 2 years, sometimes even 3 years for this to work its way through the court for there to ultimately be an auction date for investors like us to show up and bid on the property. Now, I don't want you to get bogged down or confused with this whole process and how we get to the actual day of the sale, because that really doesn't matter to us as real estate investors, as fix and flip investors. All we really care about, if we're going to be bidding on houses at trustee sales or at sheriff sales, at the courthouse steps or in an attorney's office, all we need to worry about is that 48-hour period of time leading up to the very day of the sale where we're actually at the auction bidding on the property. So that's what I want to focus on in this video, is that 48-hour period of time. Now, the first thing that's going to happen is about 24 to 48 hours prior to the auction, the lender is going to call their attorney, because again, this process is complicated from a legal standpoint, so lenders like to hire attorneys to handle this process for them. And this is the same whether it's a judicial state or a non-judicial state. So the lender contacts their attorney and says, hey, this is what the opening bid on the house is going to be. So how is that opening bid determined? Well, the first thing the lender starts out with is the principal balance on the mortgage. Now I'm going to go through a hypothetical scenario here. Let's just say a homeowner took out a loan from the bank of $100,000. So I'm going to put $100,000 up here. That's the principal balance on their loan. And that's usually what's listed in the filing in the lis pendens or the notice of default. But the thing you've got to keep in mind is that a lot of times the homeowners have this mortgage for 5, 10, 15 years. So they have paid down some of this principal balance. So let's just say in this example that they've been paying on the loan for about 8 years. And they've knocked about $5,000 off the principal balance. So really, they only owe $95,000 on the property. All right, so the lender's going, okay, well, they owe us 95 grand, but the homeowner is in foreclosure, they're behind, they haven't been making their payments. And let's just say, again, in this hypothetical scenario, that the homeowner's payment is $1,000 a month, and they haven't made a payment in 10 months. So that's $10,000. They're in arrears. That's what we call the amount that's past due on the loan, or arrears. So we're going to add $10,000 back into this. So actually they owe $105,000 to the bank, right? So the bank says, okay, we're owed $105,000, but they call the attorney and say, hey, I know you've been helping us from start to finish with this thing. We owe you some money, so we need to tack that on to what the homeowner owes, right? Now, this is all in the fine print of when you sign a mortgage or a deed of trust on your house and take a loan out, and there's like 11 pages worth of legal documents or legal language, right? That's written in there that all this stuff gets passed on to you, the homeowner, if you go into default. So the lender calls the attorney and says, how much do we owe you, or how much does the homeowner owe you for this foreclosure? And it varies, again, from state to state and how long this process takes. But let's just say, in this hypothetical example, it's $5,000. The attorney says, yeah, you owe us 5 grand for this foreclosure. So we got to add that in. So now we've got our opening bid. The lender says, okay, the homeowner owes us $105,000. We owe you 5 grand for the foreclosure. So the opening bid is $110,000. So that's how the opening bid is determined. So what we have to do as investors is decide, is the opening bid low enough for us to even show up for the auction, right, in 24 to 48 hours from now? Is it worth it? Well, let's just say this house is only worth $120,000. Well, then we're not going to want to go. There's only a $10,000 margin there. We're not going to show up at the auction, and chances are no other investor is either, because there just isn't enough room there for anyone to make any money. So what happens then? The house ends up back at the bank, and nobody bids on the house. It becomes an REO or real estate owned. Okay. Now let's just say in the same example, the house is worth $200,000. The home's worth $200,000. Well, that's $90,000 in gross margin. That may be something we can work with. So I'm going to put up here, I'm going to say the house is worth $200,000. The opening bid's 110. 90 grand in margin. So what do we have to figure out next? The very next thing, and this is the most important thing you've got to figure out if you are going to go to a sheriff's sale or a trustee sale and bid on a property. The first thing you need to, the most important and first thing you want to figure out is what is the lien position of the bank that's foreclosing. So I'm going to say number one here is lien position. Because if this happens to be the second mortgage holder, right? Guess what happens? You show up at the auction, you bid $110,000 or more on this property, and then there's a first mortgage holder on this property that's owed $50,000 to $75,000. Now you're going to lose money because you have to pay the $110,000 or more that you bid on the property at the sale, and you have to pay off the first lien position holder. Now I've bought hundreds of houses. Trustee sales in Arizona and sheriff sales in Wisconsin, and not once have I ever bid on a property where the second lien position holder or the second mortgage holder was foreclosing. It's just trouble. You don't want to get involved in a deal like that. So anyway, you want to make sure you're bidding on a first lien position. The lender that's foreclosing is in first lien position. The second thing you want to make sure you figure out is if there's anything like back taxes owed on the property, because those can add up pretty fast. There could be IRS liens on the property, and those stick to the house even after the auction for 6 months to a year. I've bought a property once where the borrower did a forbearance agreement with their lender, and the lender in this forbearance agreement got redemption rights on the house, so it made it difficult for me to sell it later. So you want to make sure you do some research to figure out that there's no back taxes, or if there are, they aren't so much money that they're going to kill your deal, or other kind of skeletons in the closet that can affect your ability to resell the house once you're done with the rehab. And that comes to number three. You got to figure out, of course, what your rehab costs are going to be on this property. And this could be tricky because if the house is occupied, and the way this works is the homeowner is the homeowner until the day of that auction. They own the house until that day that auction takes place. So they could still be living there. And if you go knock on the door and say, hey, I want to buy your house at the auction tomorrow. Can you let me come inside so I can get a rehab budget together? They're going to give you the bird. They're going to tell you to get lost. Okay? And if the house is vacant and you can't get in to see it, well, again, that becomes very tricky to determine what the rehab costs are going to be. But these are the three things you've got to know so that when you show up on the day of the auction, you are prepared and you have your number, the very highest amount of money that you're willing to bid, and that's it. You stick to that. You don't get caught up in the emotion and the frenzy of the auction, because chances are there are going to be other people there bidding against you. But if you're fully prepared, you have this information in place, and you have your number in mind, then you're not going to get so excited about things that you overpay and that you end up losing money on the deal. And of course, if you do win the property, it's going to depend on where you live. But in Arizona, for example, where I live, you have to come up with $10,000 right there on the spot. You give that to the auctioneer. The rest of the money is due the next day within 24 hours. In Wisconsin, I have to pay 10% of the winning bid. So let's just say in this example, I won it for $110,000. Well, I'd have to have $11,000. I'd have to give the auctioneer right there that day. And then there's another court hearing that takes place 10 to 14 days later, and you have to have the rest of the money at that point. So it does require you to have some liquidity, but I can tell you, you can get hard money loans to buy these properties at auctions. I've done it many, many times. So hopefully you found this training helpful. And if you're looking for some more help or support and figuring out lien position and taxes and rehab, and you really want to do buy houses at auctions, you're going to want to check out my free training. If you're watching this on YouTube, click on the description of the video. If you're watching on Instagram, click on the bio. And if you're watching on Facebook, just click on the link below. And you can sign up for my free training. Not only do I talk about foreclosures, I also give you some other techniques for finding deals and creative ways to find deals in your housing market. I also talk about funding, that kind of thing. So check out that free training. I appreciate you watching this video. We'll talk soon. Thanks for watching.